You've got this guy, Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who literally redrew the map of Europe, a military genius who for a long time seemed totally invincible. And yet for 200 years, we've been arguing about who he really was. Was he this great, forward-thinking reformer, or was he just a destructive tyrant?
I mean, just look at the nicknames he got. To his own soldiers, the guys who followed him into battle, he was their little corporal. It's affectionate, right? It sounds like a guy who was one of them. But to the old kings and queens of Europe, oh no, to them he was that Corsican ogre, a monster basically, come to tear down their entire world. You couldn't find two more different descriptions of the same person. And that's the big question, isn't it? It really gets to the heart of his incredibly complicated legacy. Hero or villain? A modernizer who dragged Europe into the future, or a megalomaniac obsessed with power? Well, to figure that out, we've really got to look at the two very, very different faces of Napoleon.
Okay, so first, let's make the case for Napoleon the Builder, because if you look past all the battles and the cannons, his impact on how society is actually structured was, well, it was revolutionary. He created things that lasted way longer than his empire ever did.
Okay, his most enduring achievement, it has to be the Napoleonic Code. You have to understand, before this, French law was an absolute chaotic mess. It was this patchwork of old feudal rules and weird regional customs. The code just swept all of that away, and in its place, it created a single, logical legal system for everyone, built on ideas that seem obvious to us now, like equality before the law and the right to own property. And this wasn't just a thing for France, it became the blueprint for modern legal systems all over the world. Its core ideas are absolutely still with us today. And he didn't just stop with the law books. Nope, he created a central bank, the Banque de France, which helped stabilize the entire economy. He completely reformed the education system. He poured money into huge infrastructure projects. We're talking new roads, bridges, canals, the works. He was literally building the arteries of a modern country. And the key thing here is, as his empire got bigger, he exported these reforms everywhere, laying the groundwork for the modern nations of Europe.
But, and this is a big but, every empire comes with a price tag. And the price for Napoleon's glory was paid in blood and treasure, right across an entire continent. This is the other side of the paradox.
You just can't separate the builder from the warlord. All that progress, all those incredible reforms, they were paid for and designed to serve his unbelievable military machine. The Napoleonic Wars raged for more than a decade, completely engulfing Europe and causing destruction on a scale nobody had ever seen before.
Just to give you an idea, let's look at the invasion of Russia in 1812. He put together something called the Grand Army. It was this colossal force of about 500,000 men, pulled from 20 different nations. It was by far the largest European army that had ever been assembled. It was supposed to be completely invincible.
But here's the thing. Napoleon's biggest enemy in Russia wasn't actually the Russian army. It was the land itself. This quote here from a soldier's diary, it just captures the brutal reality of it. The autumn rains turned the roads into these bottomless mud pits. Wagons were sinking, horses were just collapsing from exhaustion. And that misery was about to turn into the absolute horror of a retreat through a frozen wasteland.
So you remember that massive army of 500,000 men? Well, get this. Of that entire force, fewer than 20,000 managed to stagger back out of Russia. Just think about that for a second. The sheer scale of that disaster is almost impossible to wrap your head around. It was a human catastrophe that completely shattered the myth of Napoleon's invincibility. It was the beginning of the end. And the cost wasn't just in human lives either. His constant wars completely drained the continent's economies. You had crushing taxes to pay for it all, you had runaway inflation. And then there was his continental system, which was basically this desperate attempt to bankrupt Britain with an economic blockade, but it ended up just causing widespread hardship for everyone. This relentless pressure, both human and economic, is what leads us straight to his final chapter. So after his final crushing defeat at Waterloo, the master of Europe becomes a prisoner, and his final years, and even his death, are surrounded by just as much controversy as his life was. He was exiled to St. Helena, which is this tiny, remote rock of an island way out in the middle of the South Atlantic. And it's here that the man who once commanded vast armies spent his last 6 years, living in these damp, unhealthy conditions. You can see his health just slowly falling apart until he finally dies at the pretty young age of 51. And in his final moments, his mind supposedly went back to the 3 great passions of his life: France, the army, head of the army, Josephine. It's this surprisingly human, almost vulnerable glimpse into the mind of the dying emperor, and it shows you what really, truly mattered to him at the very end. But this is where the story takes another really interesting turn, because his death wasn't the end of the debate about him. In a lot of ways, it was just the beginning of a whole new one that, believe it or not, is still going on today.
Okay, so right after he died, the official autopsy came back and said he died of stomach cancer. But almost immediately, rumors started to fly. And the one theory that really stuck was that he was slowly poisoned with arsenic, either by his British captors or maybe a French royalist agent.
So let's look at the evidence. The whole arsenic theory really took off in the 1960s when tests on a lock of his hair found high levels of the poison. Sounds convincing, right? But modern science has kind of thrown a wrench in that. A big analysis in 2008 found that, yeah, the arsenic levels were high, but they were consistently high throughout his whole life, probably from things in his environment back then. And crucially, they weren't high enough to have been a lethal dose. So it's this classic case of a really juicy story colliding with scientific reality. Today, the medical consensus, and this was confirmed again as recently as 2021, overwhelmingly backs up the original diagnosis, stomach cancer.
So we're left right back where we started, with this fundamental contradiction. A man of order and law who brought nothing but chaos and war. A modernizer whose incredible ambition led to the deaths of millions. He built a new world, but he built it on top of the ruins of the old one.
In the end, there just isn't a simple answer. Napoleon was both the little corporal and the Corsican ogre. His legacy is a paradox, and it's one that forces us to ask some really tough questions about the nature of greatness itself, and what price is ever really worth paying for it.